Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and the question I'm going to start us off with today is, how many books do you read at a time? And I was thinking about this recently because I was thinking about a character in a book that I'd read a while back, and this character, I think, owned a bookstore, but she had books in different parts of her life. Like, there was her bathtub book, there was her breakfast book, there was her evening book, her lunchtime book. She had books just strategically placed all around her house, all around where she worked, all around pretty much her whole life that she had. And I thought, I don't know how she keeps them all straight. I only read one book at a time. And that's sort of true and sort of not. I always, was reading more than one book when I was in school. I did both a bachelor's and a master's degree, so that is no insignificant amount of reading. And, I always had a novel in addition to my textbooks, so I always had more than one book going on. And even now that I'm not in school, I still read more than one book at a time, even though I would tell you off the cuff that no, I don't read more than one book at a time. But when I really start thinking about it, I do, because there is the book that is sitting by my nightstand that my sister sent to me that is nonfiction, and that I read in bits and pieces. It's about introverts and extroverts, and so I've been reading up on that. I don't read it every day, but it's there when I want to pick it up and read a little bit. So there's that one. I always have a book that I'm in the middle of, but that depends on whether it's a hard not a hard or a soft copy, a physical book, or on my Kindle. So I read a lot on my Kindle nowadays, but I also still love regular books, so it depends on what I have. If I'm reading a regular book, then that's usually what I read at night before I go to sleep, because I can't sleep if I don't read at least a little bit every night. And so that's the one that I usually have, but if I'm reading a physical book, I don't usually take that with me, and I've gotten into the habit of always having a book on my phone, whether I'm, if I'm reading it on my Kindle. If I don't have a physical book, obviously that's the book that I would have on my phone that I would read if I'm standing in line somewhere, or if I'm at the doctor's office, or, whatever I have a few minutes where I'm just sitting around, standing around, waiting for something, I've got that phone, or the phone with the book on it. So if I'm reading a physical book, I have that one at home, and then I have always a book on my Kindle that I will take with me so that I have something to read when I have to wait. So if you count those, that would be 3 books that I'm currently reading right now, because I am reading a physical book at the moment, and then I have one on my phone, and then I have the book that my sister gave me, the nonfiction. And then I realized that even though I'm not physically reading it, I listen to audiobooks in the car when I am running errands, when I'm driving to work. My husband and I frequently commute together, but if I'm by myself in the car, then I listen to one of my audiobooks. He loves audiobooks too, so we sometimes listen to them together. So even though I'm not reading it, I still have a book going on. So currently I've got 4 books happening in my life, and I would tell you that I never read more than one book at a time. So clearly I don't know myself or something. But the reason that I brought this up is because the book that I'm listening to in the car right now, and the books that I have been listening to in the car for quite a while, several months now, I've been listening to Terry Brooks. And you may know Terry Brooks. You may have read him. He is the author of the Shannara series. And there has recently been a TV show made out of the second of his original trilogy, Elfstones of Shannara. And so you may have seen previews of that, or you may have watched it. So I have been listening to those, and he has a new book, a new Shannara book, coming out in June. So I thought, hey, this is the perfect time to talk about him and prepare myself for that new book that I'm excited about. So I've been reading Terry Brooks since I was in high school. He has been writing since the mid-'70s. So his first book, The Sword of Shannara, came out in the mid-'70s, and he has been writing ever since. And, well, first of all, growing up reading them, my dad, as I've said before, is a librarian. He got me into Terry Brooks as an author. And I always, in my head, pronounced the word Shannara, just because, it was a book, and that's how my brain pronounced it, and I think my dad pronounced it that way too, because when we chat about it, that's the way we would always say it. And then when I recently started listening to the audiobooks, all of the narrators say Shannara. In the first 2 or 3 books, it just drove me absolutely batty, because I'm not saying that my way of pronouncing it is correct. It's just the way it's been in my head for years, 20 years I've been reading these books. So it was cracking me up, because it drove me crazy that the narrators in my audiobooks were pronouncing it differently than I had been pronouncing it. But now I've been listening to them for so long that it's gotten stuck in my head, and I actually think Shannara in my head. So anyway, I don't know how Terry Brooks initially meant to have the word pronounced, if that's the way he pronounces it, and that's why the narrators in the audiobooks pronounce it that way. I don't know. But at any rate, Terry Brooks. He has a new book coming out in June, and it is the first in his, it's called The Fall of Shannara. So it's wrapping up the Shannara series, at least from one point of view. And if you've read them, then you know what that means from one point of view. The fascinating thing about Terry Brooks' books is that there are a lot of them. And there are the Shannara books, the specific Shannara books that come in often trilogies, sometimes longer series, and they take place at different points. So maybe I should start kind of at the beginning. So The Sword of Shannara, that was the initial one, about an elf named Shay Ohmsford and his brother, Flick Ohmsford, who encounter a druid who tells them that he needs them to help him defeat a great evil that has invaded the Four Lands. And so they go on this adventure, eventually finding their friend, one of whose last name is Leah. So there's the Ohmsfords and the Leahs. Actually, that's another word. Leah, I've always pronounced it as, but the narrators always say Lee, so however you pronounce it. So the Ohmsfords and the Leahs go on these adventures together, and that's the first one. And then the first trilogy is Sword of Shannara, Elfstones of Shannara, Wish Song of Shannara. The second book, Elfstones of Shannara, is about Shay's grandson, Will Ohmsford. And then the third book is about his children, Will's children, Bryn and Jer. So in that first trilogy, we get 3 generations of Shannaras who are found by the druid Alanon, who then needs their magic to save the Four Lands from whatever magic is threatening them. So that's a really, really, really brief description of them, but they always end up going on these adventures, and my dad and I often laugh that they often end up going on these adventures with, no supplies. They have to leave in the middle of the night, something threatens, and they run off, and they've got, the clothes on their back and a piece of bread and some cheese, and they manage to be gone for months at a time. And to some extent that's true, but there's foraging and hunting and all of those things. But my dad and I used to joke that we were going to go on an adventure, and we needed a talisman, and we just needed some bread and some cheese, and we would be fine. Anyway, so those were the first 3, and then he continues from there. And it turns out, as you read these books, that they take place in the future, a very, very far off future, after the world as we know it has had some sort of apocalypse or war or something that has altered it. So this now looks more like the days of old before technology. There's no technology that as we know it. Magic has replaced the old sciences, and now there are elves who, it turns out, have always been in the world, but they were hidden until the old world sort of passed away, and they came back out into the new world. But whatever happened in the old world also created some new races. So you've got humans, you've got elves, you've got trolls, dwarves, etc. So it's definitely a fantasy series. You've got all the elements of fantasy. You've got the different types of creatures within the book. You've got magic, you've got adventure, all of the great elements of fantasy that, suck you into the story, get you into the adventure, but then it just takes on a life of its own. It's fascinating. If you love to read series, then Terry Brooks really is an author that you should check out if you've never checked him out before, because you will not be disappointed. If you love this world, you can immerse yourself in this world for a very long time. If you are someone who just doesn't like to leave a world after you have entered into a book, this is the series for you, because you will get to immerse yourself, as I said, for a very long time. We're going to talk more about Terry Brooks and the Shannara series, but we are going to take our first break of the podcast, so stay tuned and I will be right back.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. Today we are talking about author Terry Brooks and his Shannara series. And as I mentioned before, there are a lot of these books. So there are, starting with The Sword of Shannara, then here's the thing. So if you ever want to read this series, go to Mr. Brooks's website and look at the list called Reading Order, because you can read them in the order that they were written, which would mean that you would start with The Sword of Shannara. But there is a prequel called High King of Shannara, and you could start there. In fact, as I've been rereading all of these, I started, or re-listening, I guess, in this case, I started with High King and then moved on into The Sword. So, as I said, I started reading these in high school, and I've been reading them ever since, and there's about 20. If you start with High King and move forward, there's about 20 that go in basically chronological order. There might be gaps of 100 years or more between series and between characters and those sorts of things. 100, 500 years sometimes even. So you get a really, really expansive length of time in this series also. So that's where I started, and I've read them all, and I love when they come out, but I've never really gone back and read them all together. So that's what I wanted to do. That's why I started with High King and moved forward, because I have been reading these books for, 25 years or more. I don't remember exactly when I started. And even though I remembered most of the stories, I hadn't gone back and really reread many of them. Sometimes I reread the one right before the next one in that series comes out, because, it's often a year between books in a series. And so it's really fun to go back and to start at the beginning-ish. I'll get to that again. To start at the beginning and go forward and just see how this world progresses, see how these characters develop. And, of course, characters, they're, generally relations of the characters in the first book. So you get a lot of overlap. It's fun to see how things evolve in terms of relationships in the Four Lands, how things are, how the politics change, how the land changes, the different people that you meet in this series. But so here's the thing, as I said, they've moved forward, and there are several different series, whether they're trilogies or 4 or 5 books in each series. There's several of those. And then in June, he has the first in the Fall of the Shannara series coming out. And I read that this is the kind of the conclusion of the Shannara series, except that it's not necessarily the end of the Shannara books. So here's the thing. So, as I mentioned, these books take place very far into the future. There are also a few books that are before the prequel of the High King, the first king. Excuse me, I kept saying High King, first king of Shannara. Shannara, whichever. But then there's also a trilogy called Genesis of Shannara and 2 books in the Legends of Shannara before First King. And those are the ones that sort of bridge the gap between what happened in the old world and how things started evolving into this new world after the apocalypse, after whatever had happened. Now, it turns out that pretty much all of Terry Brooks's books are connected except for the ones in the Magic Kingdom for Sale series. That's another really good series, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But he has a series called Running with the Demon. And there are several books in that series. I can't remember exactly how many, but I will look and let you know. And those are before the Shannara series. They take place in what could be considered sort of current time frame, and as you read them you start to realize that they are the prequel to the prequel to the prequel. They are how the world gets to the place where then the Shannara series takes over. So you can read them in the order that he wrote them in, starting with Sword of Shannara, or you can go all the way back to the Running with the Demon series and start reading there and then move forward. Really, it's up to you, however you want to read them. And it's fascinating because there are 20 to 30 books total, and they take you on this just wild and epic adventure. Now, quick side note before we continue. The Magic Kingdom for Sale series is not related to the Shannara series. Also written by Terry Brooks, also in the fantasy genre. Also, he began writing it in the 70s or early 80s, I think. And it's about a man whose wife has died and he finds himself at loose ends in the world. He's extremely depressed. He has no purpose. He doesn't feel like he's doing anything of consequence in the world. And suddenly he sees this ad in a Christmas catalog. And first of all, that's your first clue that this isn't written now because he didn't find it online. He found it in the Christmas catalog, which is awesome. Because I remember those, and they were really fun, and I wish they still had them to the extent they had them when I was a kid. He finds this Magic Kingdom for sale, and through a whole series of events, he decides, what the heck, I'm going to buy it. And so he buys it, and he becomes the king of a Magic Kingdom. And he actually ends up kind of going through this, like, it's not really a port. Maybe you could call it a portal, but he goes to a different world, a completely different world, not on Earth, called Landover, and he becomes the king. They give him this medallion, and it turns out that it's this whole series where the original king's brother is trying to gain control, and he's kind of an evil magician, and I don't want to give too much away, but again, it's this it's a little more lighthearted than the Shannara books can be, and it's this. There's a talking dog. There's a wizard who tends to kind of blow things up when he's not careful. There's a woman with green skin and green hair who sometimes turns into a tree. Her name is Willow. There's just a lot of fun elements in that book, and I started reading those in high school as well. And there are 5 or 6 of those now, and I don't know if I keep seeing things that there might be another one coming out, but I haven't figured out if that's actual fact that there might be another one coming out, or if it's just wishful thinking on the parts of fans who are hoping that there will be another Magic Kingdom of Landover series or book in the series. So, as I said, if you love fantasy, then that's one that then you should check out also. And if you don't want to take on the epic adventure of the Shannara books that, there's a good 30 books in there or so, and you want a slightly smaller series, then Magic Kingdom for Sale, I would highly recommend. I love them all. I've actually reread that series a couple of times, and now I'm listening to the Shannara series, so I am rereading some of those for the first time. So, Terry Brooks, Magic Kingdom of Landover, and the Shannara books, and the prequel to the prequel to the prequel, the Running with the Demon series, the Word and the Void. I think that might be what the series is called. One of the books in there is called Running with the Demon, but the series is called The Word and the Void, and that tells of the actions or the events that take place that lead up to kind of the end of the world as we know it and the beginning of the world as it's known in the times of the Shannara books. So we are going to take our second break of the podcast, and then when we come back, we'll be wrapping up this episode on Terry Brooks and the Shannara series. So stay tuned, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. Today I am talking about author Terry Brooks and my love for his Shannara series, as well as his Magic Kingdom for Sale, the Magic Kingdom of Landover series. And I mentioned before the break that the Magic Kingdom of Landover series is a little more lighthearted. And I don't mean that to say that the Shannara books are dark or depressing or anything. They're just... They're not as whimsical, they're not as lighthearted as the Magic Kingdom series. So if you do like your fantasy a little on the lighter side, then that would be the series for you. If you prefer your fantasy a little darker, a little more conflict-ridden, then the Shannara books are for you. And the Shannara books aren't scary. They aren't going to give you nightmares. They're not horror or anything. They've got monsters. They've got evil. But one thing that I like is that good tends to win out over evil. Now, it doesn't just happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without a lot of hard work and loss, but it does happen. And I think for me, that's part of the reason that I do enjoy these books so much, because I know that there's going to be a grand adventure. There's going to be a quest that is undertaken, often by someone who seems, very unlikely to be able to accomplish that quest. There are going to be characters that even though they're new characters, I'm going to be familiar with them because they have the same surnames as other characters. They're descendants of characters of the other books that I've read. And I know that there's going to be some kind of evil that is threatening, or some kind of quest that needs to be undertaken. There is going to be a party that comes together in order to go on that quest to defeat that evil, whatever it might be. There will be talismans of magic. There will be monsters that need to be faced. But generally speaking, good wins out over evil. And again, like I said, not without a lot of hard work and not without loss. But I know that there will be some kind of resolution, some kind of ending. Usually happy, but there's some endings that, that happiness comes with a price. So that may be why they're a little less whimsical than some other kinds of fantasy books. These are, I would say, adult fantasy books. Young adult, it's not like... I read them in high school, but they aren't as, I wouldn't classify them as young adult. And I have a friend who wishes that there were more categories for books, that they weren't just, children's, young adults, and adults. He thinks that there should be a lot more categories so that you know exactly what age group or what to expect when you start reading a fantasy series or a series in general. So you'll know just how dark or just how how this world is going to present itself. And he's got a point, but so this is, I would say would be considered to be an adult series, but can definitely be read by the younger crowd. Again, there's nothing terribly graphic. There's battles that are fought, but you don't feel like you're in a bloodbath or anything like that. It's not gory. It's not scary. It's not horror. But as I said, there is always an epic quest. There is there's loss. There's friendship. There's loyalty. There's camaraderie. There's always these groups of people that come together, maybe having not known each other before the book, but then they have to find a way to work together to accomplish whatever goal it is that they have set out to achieve. And for me, I really enjoy books like that, where it takes me on a story, but it also gives me these developing characters, these developing relationships, and that's part of that journey. So it's not just a journey to find the talisman and defeat whatever it is that they've come to defeat. No, it's always the development of the characters in the book as they realize what they can do, as they realize what abilities they have, whether magical or non-magical, as they learn to work together, as they learn to build confidence, just not only in themselves, but in their relationship, and then as they work to solve these problems that they've been given to solve. So, as I said, if you like fantasy and if you like epic adventures, then this is a great series. If you like books that will take you, if you like a series that will take you a long time to get through, that will suck you in for a good long time because there's a lot of books, this is definitely the book for you, the series for you. I am not going to tell you where to start. If you want to start with the first book written, Sword of Shannara, sounds great. If you want to start with First King of Shannara, perfect. That's awesome. Start there. If you want to jump back and start with Genesis of Shannara and the Legends of Shannara, that's awesome too. Or if you'd rather jump all the way back and start with The Word and the Void, hey, more power to you. I am not here to tell you how to read your Terry Brooks books. At any rate, I have been enjoying listening to them on the audiobooks. I'm really looking forward to the Black Elfstone, which is the first in the Fall of Shannara series that is coming out in June. Can't wait for that. Can't wait to see what's going to happen in this world and happen in these characters. Well, not, you know what I mean, the characters that you have learned, the families, I guess would be a better way of putting it. Families that you have gotten to know throughout all of these books, just to see where he's going to take it and see how he's going to wrap things up. And like I said, he's not necessarily done writing Shannara books, but this kind of wraps up that one part of it. He may go back and do other prequels or books within the series. So, highly recommend them. Go check them out if you love fantasy. In the meantime, I would like to thank you for joining me today. I always appreciate you hanging out with me while I talk about books, one of my favorite subjects. I'm really excited about next week's podcast. I will be interviewing author Jasmine Silvera about her book, Death's Dancer. It's a really fun read. It's a great book. So we will be interviewing her, finding out more about her, more about the book, more about her writing style. So please join me next week as I interview author Jasmine Silvera about her book, Death's Dancers. Death's Dancer, singular, not plural, excuse me. Thank you again for joining me. As always, you can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can download those podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and any app that you use for your mobile device. You can find us on social media. I would love to hear from you on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr. You can find out some of the updates that are coming. For instance, when I'm interviewing authors, I'll put that on there beforehand so you know who I'll be interviewing that's coming up. And I'd love to hear your suggestions if you have books that you love that you would like to see featured on here, or authors that maybe I can get on the podcast to interview. That would be great. So find me on social media. I would love to hear from you. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful week. Go out there, enjoy the week, enjoy the weekend, but most of all, go get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.